Hi everybody, I'm Magen Solomon, the very happy conductor of the San Francisco Bach Choir. And I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you today about one of our upcoming concerts, the B minor Mass by Johann Sebastian Bach, perhaps one of the greatest pieces ever written. And I'm thrilled to be able to have a chance to chat with my old friend, Alexandra Amati, who is a phenomenal musicologist and speaks very well about all sorts of kinds of music. She knows about opera, she knows about symphonies, she knows about choral works, and it's a real honor to have her as part of our team. Even though she's in Boston, she's written our program notes for years and is continuing to do that. So it's a particular joy to have her talk to us about this wonderful piece that we're going to be performing in a couple of weeks. So nice to see you, Alexandra.
Thank you. You're making me blush, but thank you. I sang in the Bach Choir for the best 25 years of singing of my life, and I miss it a lot. But I miss in particular doing the B minor Mass, but I'm very glad to be here, though.
Good. And I look forward to chatting about this piece.
So, yes, the history of the B minor Mass. I always start by saying that Bach never wrote a Mass in B minor because, first of all, it's not really in B minor, it's in D. Mostly in D, though it ends in B minor. And secondly, he never wrote this piece as a whole Mass. He compiled it at the end of his life. Towards the end of his life, he died in 1750, he apparently felt the urge to put together monumental works, like the musical offering or the art of the fugue, and what we know as the B minor Mass. When we talk about a Mass, we are of course talking about the 5 parts of the liturgy that are performed the same every day of the year. So the 5 parts are the Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, and Agnus Dei. And what he did is he put together portions of the liturgy and then composed the few parts that were missing, and he also added what is called contrafacta, which is pieces that he had already written to which he adapted new words of the liturgy. He had a Sanctus, which was very old, 1724 I believe is the year. And he had composed the Kyrie and Gloria in 1733. Some scholars believe that he may have composed it for the re-inauguration of the Dresden Chapel, which didn't happen until after he was dead in 1751. The oldest music in the piece is a rewriting of a cantata, Cantata 12, that he had written earlier in his life. The last parts he composed in 1748-49, that is a credo which includes several parts. The Hosanna, Benedictus, and then the Agnus Dei. And so when he put it together, he had this Missa, as it's called. The manuscript of the Mass actually contains the separate parts, and we don't know what he composed them for. In other words, there is no evidence whatsoever that the piece was ever heard by Bach, performed during his lifetime. It would hardly fit a liturgical service because it's too long, and we don't really know what he composed, why he composed it. It might sound like he just put haphazardly things together, but he did not, because one thing that was very important for Bach was the architecture, the structure. Everything had to be symmetrical and proper for what the occasion was. So for example, the central movement of the 5 is the Credo, which is also the profession of the faith, and so it's the central liturgical text. And he makes that part into 9 movements, which are symmetrically arranged around the center movement, which is a 4-part chorus on Cantata 12. And he sets it to the Crucifixus text. And then if you walk out from there, you have this 4-part chorus, then you have 5-part chorus. The first 2 and the last 2 movements are 5-part choruses or 4-part choruses, and then there's a solo movement. So everything is like a cathedral, everything is arranged around the center. And so he really was very, very keen on writing something that made sense as a whole. Again, we have no idea why he put it all together, and we don't know of any performance that happened during his life, but it is a monumental work. Of course, by putting together this work at the end of his life, he also put in it every single compositional style that he had used in his life. So we go from choruses that sound almost like Palestrina in the ancient style, and you will recognize them because they are very elaborate. The parts are independent, and there's usually only the bass accompaniment, all the way to the most modern style with trumpets and the whole orchestra and a very lively choir, very lively lines. And the same for the solos, from the most opera-like arias to very simple singing. So it is really an encyclopedia of everything that Bach had done in his life. It's just magnificent.
Indeed it is. And what people might be interested in knowing is just how big it is. I will hold up my score and see all these tabs. That's all the 28 different movements. 3 of them are duets, 6 of them are solos, and the rest is for the chorus. So it's an enormous choral work, perhaps one of the most challenging and one of the best for most people's opinions. Alexandra, how many times have you sung this piece?
Probably 7 or 8. A couple of them with you, a few with the previous conductor, the longtime conductor, David Babbitt of the Bach Choir. For him, it was kind of like his signature piece, and so we did it a number of times. It's just, and you know, when David Babbitt died, suddenly he was 54. He had already conducted the Bach Choir for over 2 decades. At his memorial, we sang the Dona Nobis Pacem from the B minor. It was kind of the signature piece of the choir.
How lovely. One of the things that I think is particularly great about this piece is just that it's so much fun to sing. Once you've learned it, it has many challenges. Sometimes the chorus is split into 4 parts, sometimes into 5 parts, sometimes into 6 parts, and sometimes into 8 parts. And Bach uses his full arsenal of choral writing to explore all the different colors and the different textures. And as Alexandra said, sometimes full orchestra and sometimes one singer and just a few instruments. And that variety makes it a wonderful piece to listen to. Yes. The whole thing is long. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes, depending on how fast you go. And it's a real tour de force for the orchestra and the chorus and the soloists. And it's also a full journey for the audience to hear the arc of this wonderful work, the quiet, intimate bits and the loud bits, especially when the 3 trumpets and the timpani come in. It's a lot of fun.
Yes.
I think one of the things that's interesting is how he uses the instruments. There are 2 flutes, 2 oboes, sometimes 3 oboes, bassoon, 3 trumpets and timpani, a horn who only gets to play in one of the movements, but it's a spectacular movement, and then strings and continuo, which is to say low bass instruments and a keyboard. In our case, it'll be an organ. And the range of colors that Bach manages to find is just extraordinary. And it's particularly fun, I think, for the audience to be able to hear sometimes the one instrument is prominent, sometimes one choral section is prominent. The piece is filled with fugues, which means that the same little bit of tune is passed between the different parts of the choir. In many kinds of music, the sopranos always get the fun tunes and everybody else has to play a supporting role. In this piece, everybody gets the good stuff. And it's a joy for everyone to be able to share the great melodies, share the great harmonies, and talk to one another in a musical way.
Yeah, if I may interject, when you talk about fugues, of course, the fugue is the most complex of all compositional techniques, because there are lots of rules about how these melodies, or this melody, depending if it's a single theme or two themes, are woven into the composition. And where I'm going with that is that Bach always considered that he was not writing for us fellow humans. He was writing for God or the divinity. And so he made absolutely no concessions for human frailty or shortcomings. And so he has absolutely no problem writing extremely complicated music or at the limits
for
of the
everybody.
range. And, you know, if you can't do it, then you're out. Or you deal with it. That's what I wrote, and there's no compromise. And so there's so many fugues or double fugues. But that's also what makes the music so fantastic. You were asking me how many times I sang the B minor. If you ask me how many times I heard, I don't know, any fugue by Bach, I might say dozens, but every time I find something else because there's so many layers. It's like an onion on steroids. There's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of meaningful stuff happening, which you can only get when you can leave the surface on the side, because you already know what's happening on the surface, and then you start listening below the surface, and then below what's below the surface, and there's this very intricate musical lace which he weaves in these, especially in the ancient sounding movements.
And I like to compare it in some ways to a Gothic cathedral, even though the Gothic cathedrals were, of course, many hundreds of years before Bach. But no matter where you look, there's a little detail. There's a face, or there's an angel, or there's a gargoyle with its tongue sticking out at you. Not that Prof probably had tongue sticking out, but he has a wonderful way of putting all these little details in, and no matter where you listen to it, what part you focus on, and that's something actually that I suggest that the audience focus on. You know, listen just to the trumpets. What are they doing? Listen just to the oboes. What are they doing? As a way to get into a very dense and complex piece some of the time.
Right, and he has he treats the voices as instruments. So sometimes the voices are called upon to make flourishes as if they were a violin, or, you know, sustain notes as if they were a trumpet. And so he uses the idiom of instruments with the voices so he can interweave them together. So, for example, if you listen carefully, some of the fugues in the B minor Mass, they're not just say that it's four parts. It's not just the soprano and the alto and the tenor and the bass, but the instruments also have their own turn at the melody, making it a more than whatever number of choral parts there are in the fugue. So it may be a 4-part chorus, but it's a 7-part fugue with the instruments doing
and
the
some
same
of the
thing.
time, of course, the instruments get to do something completely different, which is a very different kind of style and gives a different kind of color to the whole thing, and also can support the text, which of course the instruments don't get to say, can support the text in new and interesting ways.
But there is another thing. In some of the compositions by Bach, he actually manages to have the wordless instruments actually add a semantic layer to the music, which is by having the instruments play, for example, a Lutheran hymn tune that everybody knows, and they don't need to know the words because everybody in the audience would have known the words. So in practice, your trumpet or your violin is actually saying those words, and that layer is added upon what's being sung by the choir.
Exactly. And that reminds me of the Confiteor, where we have plain chant stuck in the middle of a fugue. At two different levels, one fast and one slow, and back and forth between the altos and the basses.
Right.
So he's harking back to a much earlier time, using plain chant in the middle of this Baroque fugue.
Right. That's another way in which you can add layers. I told you it's an onion, but it's on steroids. It has lots and lots and lots of layers, which of course are added also by the color of the instruments sometimes. And everybody's familiar with that. We all watch movies or just think, when Handel writes the trumpet shall sound, and of course the trumpet sounds. That's kind of an obvious connection, but sometimes Bach will use flutes to indicate angelic voices or angels, and more difficult passages, difficult texts like crucifixion or whatever, by using lower instruments. So there's a whole lot of ways in which the instrumental timbre can add to the a semantic layer to what's being sung in words.
And there's also the wonderful textures that you have, for example, in the Sanctus, when you have different parts of the choir talking to other parts, or in the 8-part movement where we have, with the Hosanna, where you have the choir, part of the choir talking to the other part of the choir, and then the instruments commenting on that.
Right.
Yet another texture.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, that's why I say the more you listen to it, the more layers you discover. And it offers, so Bach in general, but the B minor in particular, offers the first time listener a lot, but also the 100th time listener a lot. It's not one of those pieces where once you've heard it a number of times, there's nothing
new for you. And then you're bored with it, yeah. And I think one of the challenges for somebody who is hearing it for the first time is it's just so overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a tsunami of sound. And I think one of the challenges is to find a way into the piece, whether it's listening to a particular instrument or watching a particular instrument,
right,
or thinking only about the words, trying to trace a few of the words through the texture, or just watching what's going on in the continuo section, the cellos and basses and the keyboard player. How are they communicating with each other? Because I think one of the wonderful things about a concert is you actually get to see how the music is being made, and you get to focus your eyes on one part of the chorus or one part of the orchestra and see how the magic is made.
Right, or concentrate on one section of the choir, see what the tenors are doing. No, don't look at the tenors, because that kind of enables them, but look at another part. I'm kidding. There's a joke about not enabling the tenors because they already do it themselves. But I was going to say, I obviously am not in San Francisco, so I don't know what orchestra you are using, but chances are the orchestra might actually have instruments that most people haven't seen or are not familiar with, or that are familiar instruments played in non-familiar ways, because of course the Baroque musical practice was very different. Your flutes might be made of wood, of ebony, rather than being made of silver or gold. Your strings are probably going to have gut strings rather than metal strings, and that changes.
Which makes them so much more gentle, yeah.
Yeah, it's warmer, right? And there might be, I don't know if you're using a violone or a viola da gamba or any instrument that might not be familiar to people who are not familiar with Baroque music.
Yeah, we'll have a violone. And I think also the bows of the stringed instruments are so different. You can't tell that from the audience, but they're a slightly different shape, and it makes the sound very different.
Yes.
The trumpets are different, the horn is different, all of the instruments are different, and it's a much mellower, gentler sound than you find in a modern orchestra.
Yes.
And one of the things that makes doing this music with singers so wonderful, I think those instruments blend with singers' voices in some ways in very different and pleasing ways than a modern orchestra would with the chorus.
Yes, though also the vocal technique is different, because of course a modern orchestra would probably expect to be performing with operatic voices, which Bach is not.
And what's interesting is, I've had the experience of doing the piece with a professional choir of 24 voices, and 3 weeks earlier I had done it with 120 voices. And the thing that's so magnificent about this piece is that it works at all levels. Some people have ideas about what's proper to do, but I feel that it's sort of a Teflon work of art, and that it's pretty hard to ruin. In fact, it's almost impossible to ruin. And there have been different versions with different sized choirs and different numbers of orchestra players. And yet the basic material is so wonderful that it works well on any scale.
Right. So there are people who claim that Bach should be performed with one person on a part or very small choruses because that's what Bach had. Yes, that is true. Well, then also it shouldn't be women performing because Bach had a choir of boys and men. But that doesn't mean that he didn't think that, one, he could have done it with women if he had had them, or two, that he didn't think that this or other pieces were universal enough that they could do exactly what you say, that is, being performed by a variety of different ensembles. And of course, it's been also jazzed up by some groups, which is an interesting take. Not one that I would prefer necessarily, but there is so much.
But it does show another side of it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And there are recordings of pieces by Bach being performed by voices rather than instruments, scat singing, like, you know, the swingle singers. And you still have your Bach there. You still have the same notes. And it's moving. It's incredibly moving. I can never get to the end of the B minor Mass without having shed tears. Don't tell the conductor.
I probably heard it for the first time in utero because my mother performed it with the Shaw Chorale 3 days before I was born. And it's a family legend that I apparently stood as a 1-year-old and listened to an hour and a half of rehearsal without moving. That's what my father says. Now, parents can be very unreliable when they're talking about their children, but nevertheless, it's been a piece that's been close to my heart, as I think it has been to yours, all of my life. And so it's so wonderful to be able to perform it yet again.
I grew up in a household where I think the newest recording that there was probably early Mozart. I don't even know if we got that far. So I grew up, you know, in a Bach household, essentially, except for the Beatles. There was some Beatles, but other than the Beatles, it was up to Bach. So yeah, very similar to your story. It is what I grew up with, and it's what my kids grew up with. My son, when my second son, he was 2 when I took him to an organ concert, and the organist started playing, I don't remember what it was, and this 2-year-old little thing stood up on the pew and screamed in the middle of the church, "I want Bach!" Which the organist heard because he told me.
Oh dear.
Yes. So yeah, Bach is, you know, I'm not going to say he's the best composer ever because everyone has their own favorites, but there is so much in Bach. The only thing he never composed was an opera, but there is so much of everything. If you want simple music, you want chorales, you can get chorales. You want very complex fugues, and you get them. And all of it is in the B minor because it is this encyclopedic work, which would not have worked for the liturgy. So that's also why it's not clear why he would have composed it. Even though the liturgy on Sunday at that time probably lasted between 3 and 4 hours, you still couldn't have 2 hours of the ordinary of the Mass being sung.
And I think what you said is absolutely right. He was writing it for God. And that's something that I'm not sure happens all that much anymore. And it gives a real insight into the man and his deep Lutheran faith and how important music was as a communication method with the Almighty. People sang chorales in church every Sunday. They sang them at home, and that knowledge of the repertoire and that feeling of connection with liturgy, with scripture, was critically important. And we know from Bach's Bible that he wrote tons of stuff in the margin.
Yes.
He was responding to the text and having his own thoughts and questioning things.
Yeah, I mean, his job was in 4 churches anyway, so he did need to know the liturgy inside out because he had to write a cantata for every Sunday, and he had to know what kind of feast it was and what the text was that would be appropriate for the cantata for that particular Sunday, and every other festivity. So he certainly knew everything inside and out, which is also why he could use the Lutheran hymns in, say, the first movement of the St. Matthew Passion, adding that text without having to actually out of the words, which he does throughout, and even in his organ pieces. Is the orchestra an orchestra, or are there separate players that will come together for this work? And how do you manage working with the orchestra?
Well, we won't work with them until the week of the performance, of course, but it is the Jubilate Orchestra. So it will be people who play together all the time, but not a standing orchestra as such.
Right, but there is a kind of homogeneity in the group because they are used to playing together.
They play together very frequently in the various Baroque orchestras here in town, or in Baroque concerts, outside of San Francisco. Yeah, it's a fine orchestra, and we have, by the way, 5 magnificent soloists as well, whom I'm really looking forward to working with.
Are they all people that you haven't worked with before, or they're
4 out of the 5 I've worked with before.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great crowd. And the chorus is just sounding fantastic.
How large is the choir right now?
We have 80 singers.
That is a lot of singers. The thing with when I was talking about, how many people should be singing this work is, and what people say about what Bach would have wanted. Obviously, if you have 8 singers or 80 singers, the nimbleness, I don't know if that's a word, but there's a different level of agility that you can use. On the other hand, there's a different level. The other side of the scale is that the warmth that comes from a group, as opposed to the individual, is really, I think, what the message is. This is a congregational event, a congregational work. So if it were one person on a part, it would be more about the singers than about what's being sung. It reminds me of one of the
wonderful things about having a larger choir is that the singers actually get a chance to take a breath every once in a while, which is not possible if you're one on a part.
No. And also, again, it is about this congregation of people singing. It's not about them, it's about the music. The conductor, the Bach Choir conductor, David Babbitt, whom I mentioned earlier, used to say to us very often that if people came out of our concert saying, "Oh, what a great chorus," we had missed our opportunity. If they were supposed to be saying great music, we were just the vessel, the performers, but it was about the music, not about us. And I think with works like the B minor, it's even more so.
Alexandra, I'm so sorry you're not here singing with us. That would be so lovely.
Me too, but I still have my monumental score from when I sang it with you, with all the notes you gave us. And I still use every once in a while what you had us write in the Mass score when we performed it in Berkeley. It's a very long work, and when we performed it in Berkeley, I don't know if you remember, the choir didn't have chairs. We were just standing, and we were like sardines on that little stage. And you had us write, when we was getting to the last movement, "I have never felt so fresh," on every page of the score. It still says that.
And we will be doing that again because it is a long song.
Yes.
It's a long song.
But it's very rewarding as a singer. I must say that as a performer, you get to sing in all these different styles. You get to sing as one of 4 parts, one of 5 parts, one of 8 parts. You get to sing in the ancient style, in the modern style. You get to sing very loudly, very intimately, very low, talking about crucifixion, very dissonant, and then festive, like the Sanctus. As a singer, it is the most, even though it's probably my second desert island piece, the first one would be the St. Matthew, it is the most rewarding as a singer. If you can get to the end, you get everything. It's like a buffet, you get everything.
Alexandra, it has been so wonderful to talk to you about this piece, a piece which we both love. I so miss having you here and having you in the choir, having you share your wisdom with the choir in person, which I guess this will be.
Yes.
Just so you know, your program notes will be in the program, so you'll be sharing your wisdom with our whole audience for this concert. And I'm just so pleased that we were able to have this chat about my favorite piece in the world.
Me too. And you and I both know that we could go on for hours because there's so much to say. I'm glad my notes are there. Of course, there's the extended version that I wrote for the choir, which I call the musings, which hopefully the choir still has access to, where I just talked about it forever, and you could get me to talk for more forever. about all the aspects. And as I said, you can just keep digging, and I'm sure you're going to have a great time. It's going to be a great performance, but good luck with everything. I know you're going to do a fantastic job, as you always do.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.